The sky above Viridian Prime burned with the light of dying ships. Elder Maivara stood at the window of the ancient temple, watching as another defense station exploded in orbit. The light reached her eyes seconds before the shockwave rattled the old stones around her. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to ancestors who could no longer hear her. The Kryloth had come 6 days ago. 6 days of fire and death. 6 days of watching her world die piece by piece. The blue-skinned Viridian people had never known war before. They were artists, philosophers, teachers. Their weapons were words and ideas, not guns and bombs. Against the Kryloth Empire, those weapons meant nothing. Behind her, the survivors huddled together in the temple's main hall. There were maybe 60 left from a city that once held 10,000. Most were injured. All were terrified. The children had stopped crying 2 days ago. They had learned that silence kept them safe, at least for a little while longer. Kale, a young engineer who had dreamed of building starships, limped over to stand beside the elder. His left arm hung useless at his side, broken when a building collapsed during the bombardment. "How much longer do we have?" he asked quietly. Maivara looked at the energy readings on her ancient datapad. The temple's shields were the last working defense in the entire city. They had held because the temple was built over a powerful energy source, something left behind by their ancestors thousands of years ago, but even ancient power had limits. "The shields are at 12%, she said. "When the sun rises tomorrow, they will fail. Then the Kryloth will come." Kyle nodded slowly. He had known the answer before asking. Everyone knew. They had all seen what the Kryloth did to cities that fell. The lucky ones died quickly. The others were taken away to work in the Kryloth mines until their bodies gave out. Children were processed into something the Kryloth called biomass, food for their empire. "We sent the distress signals," Kale said. "All 17 of them. Someone should have answered by now." "The Galactic Council responded," Maivara said bitterly. She pulled up the message on her datapad and read it again. Though she had memorized every word, "They regret to inform us that Viridian Prime falls outside protected space. Military intervention is not approved at this time. They wish us luck in our negotiations with the Kryloth Empire." "Negotiations." Kyle laughed, a sound without humor. "The Kryloth don't negotiate. They take what they want and kill everything else." Above them, Commander Zalthar watched the planet from his flagship. His compound eyes gleamed as he studied the tactical display. The Viridian Defense Forces had been destroyed in the first hour of the invasion. Their ships had been old and slow, built for exploration rather than war. They had died bravely but uselessly. Now only one target remained, a single shield signature in the ruins of the capital city. Zalthar's mandibles clicked together in satisfaction. In one more day, maybe less, that shield would fall. Then his ground forces would sweep through and claim the final survivors. The planet's resources would be stripped and processed. In a month, there would be no sign that the Viridian people had ever existed. This was how the Kryloth Empire worked. They expanded, consumed, and moved on. They had conquered 47 worlds in the last century. Viridian Prime would be number 48. And the Galactic Council would do nothing, just as they always did. The Council cared only about the powerful, the important worlds. Places like Viridian Prime were too small, too far away, too unimportant to defend. Zalthar had heard rumors about new players in the galaxy. A species called humans who had appeared from nowhere and claimed to protect the weak. But Zalthar dismissed such stories as propaganda. In his experience, no species helped others without expecting something in return, and certainly no species was powerful enough to challenge the Kryloth Empire. As the sun set on Viridian Prime, Elder Maivara led the survivors in the Song of Passing. It was a song their people sang for the dying, a final goodbye to the world and all its beauty. Voices trembling with fear and exhaustion, they sang together in the fading light. Parents held their children close. The injured supported each other. They sang because it was all they had left. The song echoed through the ruined temple, carrying out through broken windows into the destroyed city beyond. It was a song of sorrow but also of love. Love for their world, for each other, for the life they had lived before the Kryloth came. If these were to be their final hours, they would face them as Viridians. With dignity. With grace. Together. Kale sang with tears running down his blue face. Beside him, a small child held his good hand. The child's parents were gone, killed in the first bombardment. Kale had been looking after her since then. Her name was Lyra, and she was only 6 years old. Too young to understand that tomorrow might never come for any of them. When the song ended, silence fell over the temple. It was a heavy silence filled with unspoken fears and final thoughts. Some people prayed. Others simply held each other. Mayvara stood at the window again, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Those stars had once seemed so beautiful, so full of promise. Now they only reminded her of how small and alone they were. Then something changed. The stars began to move. At first, Mayvara thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. But no, the stars were definitely shifting, swirling, gathering together in patterns that should not exist. She grabbed her datapad with shaking hands and activated the scanner function. The readings made no sense. "Kale," she called out, her voice sharp with confusion. "Come look at this." The young engineer hurried over, wincing as his broken arm jostled against his side. He looked at the datapad readings and his eyes went wide. Those are jump signatures. Dozens of them. No, hundreds. Ships are coming out of faster-than-light travel. The Kryloth reinforcements? Someone asked fearfully. No, Kale said, his voice filled with wonder. These signatures are different. These aren't Kryloth ships. On the Kryloth flagship, alarms began blaring across every console. Commander Zalthar rushed to the tactical station, shoving his officer aside to see the readings himself. What he saw made his blood run cold. Ships were appearing out of nowhere. Massive vessels with configurations he had never seen before. They moved into defensive positions around Viridian Prime with practiced precision, forming a wall between the planet and the Kryloth fleet. Their hulls were painted in colors that seemed strange and aggressive. Their weapon systems were already powering up, filling space with dangerous energy readings. "Identify those vessels immediately," Zalthar ordered, his voice cracking with barely controlled fear. His tactical officer worked frantically at the console. "Unknown configuration, Commander. They're not broadcasting any recognized identification codes. Wait, we're receiving a transmission." The main view screen flickered to life. Zalthar found himself staring at a creature he had only seen in intelligence reports. Two forward-facing eyes like a predator, smooth skin covering dense muscle, and an expression that somehow conveyed both calm professionalism and barely restrained violence. The human wore a dark uniform with insignia that meant nothing to Zalthar. Behind him, the bridge of his ship hummed with activity. Other humans moved with smooth efficiency, their hands dancing across controls as they prepared for battle. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Force vessel Harbinger," the human said. His voice was steady and cold like ice water. "You are in violation of the Terran Protection Accords. You have exactly 5 minutes to withdraw all forces from Viridian Prime. This is your only warning." Zalthar stared at the screen in disbelief. Then his mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. "Humans, you're the humans we've heard about. Primitives who barely discovered faster-than-light travel a few decades ago. You dare threaten the Kryloth Empire?" Captain Morrison's expression did not change. His eyes remained cold and focused. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. "I have 247 warships under my command," Zalthar said. "You are outnumbered and outgunned. Withdraw now, or I will add human ships to the wreckage orbiting this world." 4 minutes. In the temple below, the Viridians watched their scanners with growing hope and terror. The human fleet was smaller than the Kryloth armada. Much smaller. But something about the way those human ships positioned themselves spoke of confidence, of deadly purpose. Elder Mayvara found herself holding her breath. She had given up on rescue. The Council had abandoned them. The galaxy had turned its back. But now, at the last possible moment, strangers had appeared in the darkness. Strangers who spoke of protection. Strangers who faced impossible odds without flinching. Strangers called humans. 3 minutes, Captain Morrison said, and the countdown to everything changing had begun. The bridge of the Harbinger was quiet except for the steady hum of the ship's systems. Captain Jake Morrison stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the countdown timer on the main screen. Around him, his crew worked with the calm efficiency of people who had trained for this moment their entire careers. Lieutenant Amy Brooks sat at the tactical station, her fingers moving across the controls without looking. She had every weapon system ready to fire, missiles loaded, railguns charged, energy weapons hot and waiting. The Harbinger alone carried enough firepower to level a continent. And it was not alone. 2 minutes, Morrison announced calmly. Behind the Harbinger, 47 more human warships held position. The fleet had been tracking the Kryloth for 3 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The attack on Viridian Prime had given them that moment. Now the Kryloth were trapped between the human fleet and the planet, exactly where Morrison wanted them. The Earth Defense Force had been created 40 years ago when humanity first learned they were not alone in the universe. A damaged alien survey ship had crashed in the Pacific Ocean and everything had changed. The technology they recovered had been studied, improved, and weaponized, because humanity had learned long ago that peace was something you had to be ready to fight for. Commander Zalthar watched his tactical display with growing unease. The human ships were not moving like any fleet he had encountered before. They did not cluster together for mutual protection. Instead, they spread out in a three-dimensional pattern that created overlapping fields of fire. Every angle of approach was covered. Every gap was a trap. "Commander, they're just trying to frighten us," his second officer said nervously. "We outnumber them more than 4 to 1. Our ships are larger and more heavily armed." Zalthar wanted to believe that, but something in the way those human ships positioned themselves made his instincts scream danger. He had conquered 47 worlds. He recognized predators when he saw them, and those ships moved like hunters. "1 minute," Captain Morrison said. In the temple on Viridian Prime, Elder Mayvara had gathered everyone around the scanner display. They watched in silence as the two fleets faced each other in the darkness above their world. The Viridian people had no military tradition, no understanding of tactics or strategy. But they understood numbers, and the humans were badly outnumbered. "Why don't they run?" Kale whispered. "They came to warn the Kryloth. They delivered their message. They should retreat before it's too late." But Mayvara was watching the human fleet's formation. She had spent her life studying ancient Viridian texts, including historical records from before her people had abandoned violence. She recognized the pattern the humans were using. It was called a killing formation. The humans had not come to warn the Kryloth. They had come to destroy them. 30 seconds, Morrison said. Lieutenant Brooks spoke without looking up from her console. "Sir, I'm reading weapons log from multiple Kryloth vessels. They're preparing to fire." "Let them," Morrison replied calmly. "It won't help them." The final seconds ticked away in silence. Every human crew member knew their role. Every weapon was aimed and ready. Every ship was positioned perfectly. They had trained for scenarios like this thousands of times. But this was real. This was the moment that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. "Time's up," Captain Morrison said quietly. Then, to his crew, he gave the order that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. "Light them up." The Harbinger's weapons opened fire first, and the night lit up like a newborn star. Railguns fired solid projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. The projectiles hit with such force that they punched straight through Kryloth shields like they were paper. Behind the railgun fire came missiles that twisted and turned in flight, evading defensive fire with intelligence that seemed almost alive. And then came the energy weapons. Humanity had not invented directed energy weapons, but they had perfected them. The beams that lanced out from the human ships were focused with such precision that they could cut through armor like a hot knife through butter. They sliced Kryloth cruisers in half. They cored through battleships from bow to stern. They turned mighty dreadnoughts into expanding clouds of debris. In 90 seconds, 23 Kryloth warships simply ceased to exist. Commander Zalthar watched in horror as his fleet began to die. Evasive maneuvers. "Return fire! All vessels converge on their flagship." The Kryloth ships moved to obey, their massive forms accelerating toward the human fleet. They opened fire with every weapon they had. Plasma cannons blazed. Missile batteries launched thousands of warheads. Energy weapons filled space with deadly light, but the humans were already moving. The human ships accelerated in ways that should have been impossible. They pulled maneuvers that violated every known principle of space combat. They twisted and rolled and dove through the Kryloth formation like sharks through a school of fish. The Kryloth weapons kept hitting empty space, firing at where the human ships had been seconds before. And every time the humans moved, they fired. Short, precise bursts that found weak points in Kryloth armor. Missiles that seemed to think for themselves, hunting down targets with ruthless efficiency. Railgun rounds that hit with the force of small meteors. The battle was not a contest. It was a massacre. While the space battle raged above, Assault shuttles dropped through Viridian Prime's atmosphere like falling stars. Inside one of those shuttles, Sergeant Kyle Martinez checked his weapon for the third time. The MA-77 assault rifle felt solid and familiar in his hands. Around him, his squad prepared their gear in tense silence. 30 seconds to touchdown, the pilot called out. Lieutenant Chris Bailey had the controls, and he was pushing the shuttle through atmospheric entry at speeds that made the hull glow red. Hope you all made peace with your gods because this is going to be rough. Next to Martinez, Corporal Lisa Grant was loading grenades into her launcher. She looked up and caught his eye. You scared, Sarge? Terrified, Martinez admitted. But that's good. Fear keeps you sharp. The shuttle hit the ground hard enough to rattle Martinez's teeth. The rear hatch blew open before they had fully stopped, and suddenly they were in hell itself. The Kryloth had launched a final ground assault on the temple, and the area around it was a war zone. Contact front, someone shouted. Martinez moved without thinking, years of training taking over. His rifle came up and he fired in controlled bursts. A Kryloth soldier, 3 meters tall with chitinous armor covering its insectoid body, fell backward with holes burned through its chest. Another appeared and Martinez shot it too. And another. And another. Around him, his squad spread out and advanced. They moved like they had trained together for years, because they had. Each soldier knew exactly where the others would be, what they would do, how they would react. They flowed through the battlefield like water, finding cover, eliminating threats, pushing forward. The Kryloth were strong. They were fast. They were vicious fighters who had conquered dozens of worlds. But they had never faced humans before. They did not understand that humanity had been warring against itself for thousands of years. Violence was written into human DNA in ways that peaceful species could not comprehend. Humans had climbed to the top of their planet's food chain by being better predators than anything else that lived there. Clear left, Grant called out, her grenade launcher thumping as she destroyed a Kryloth heavy weapon position. Moving up. More shuttles were landing now, disgorging squad after squad of human soldiers. They wore powered armor that made them faster and stronger. They carried weapons designed to kill efficiently, and they fought with an intensity that shocked the Kryloth defenders. Martinez led his squad toward the temple entrance, fighting for every meter of ground. The Kryloth tried to hold them back, but they might as well have tried to hold back the tide. The humans kept coming, kept shooting, kept advancing. When their rifles ran empty, they switched to pistols. When those ran dry, they drew knives. And when necessary, they fought with their hands. Inside the temple, the Viridians heard the sounds of battle change. The high-pitched whine of Kryloth plasma weapons began to be drowned out by the deeper, more percussive crack of human rifles. And underneath it all, they heard something else. Human voices calling orders to each other, coordinating their attack. Speaking in a language the Viridians did not understand but whose meaning was clear, the humans were winning. Martinez reached the temple door and kicked it open. His rifle swept across the interior looking for threats. What he saw made him pause. Dozens of aliens, all of them injured, all of them terrified, staring at him with wide eyes. Children clutched their parents. The wounded supported each other. For a moment, nobody moved. The Viridians saw a human soldier in battle armor, his weapon still smoking from recent use. They saw a creature that looked like something from their ancient myths, when their people still told stories about warriors and heroes. Martinez lowered his rifle slightly and raised his free hand in what he hoped was a peaceful gesture. It's okay, he said slowly. We're here to help. Elder Maivara stepped forward carefully. Her translator device struggled with the unfamiliar language for a moment before finding the right words. You are the humans? The ones who answered our call? The morning sun rose over Viridian Prime for the first time in a week without the sound of explosions. Elder Maivara stood outside the temple, hardly able to believe what she was seeing. Human soldiers moved through the ruins of her city, but they were not destroying. They were helping. Medical teams in white armor worked alongside Viridian survivors, treating injuries with equipment that seemed impossibly advanced. Engineers were setting up power generators to restore electricity. Supply shuttles landed every few minutes, bringing food, water, medicine, and building materials. The humans worked with focused efficiency, as if saving a dying world was just another day at the office. Sergeant Martinez walked over to where Maivara stood. He had removed his helmet, and she could finally see his face clearly. He looked tired, but satisfied. Elder, we've set up a field hospital in the old market square. We need to get your wounded there as soon as possible. You've done so much already, Mayvara said quietly. I don't understand why. Your people came here to fight the Kryloth, and you've won. Why do you stay to help us rebuild? Martinez looked uncomfortable with the question. Because that's what you do when people need help. You help them. It's not complicated. But it was complicated to Mayvara. In all her years of studying galactic history, she had never heard of a species that fought so fiercely and then turned around to provide humanitarian aid. Most conquerors either enslaved the survivors or simply left. The humans seemed to operate by different rules. Corporal Lisa Grant was helping a young Viridian child reach the medical station. The child, a girl named Lyra, held Grant's hand tightly and looked up at the human soldier with wonder. Are you really from Earth? Lyra asked in broken standard language. That's right, Grant replied with a smile. From a city called Chicago. It's really cold there in winter. What's winter? Lyra asked. Grant laughed. A time when frozen water falls from the sky and covers everything. We'll show you pictures sometime. Captain Jake Morrison had come down to the surface to inspect the situation personally. He stood in what had once been the city center, now a crater filled with rubble, and watched his soldiers work. His executive, Officer Commander Paul Wright, stood beside him with a data pad showing damage assessments. The city is approximately 70% destroyed, Wright reported. We've got 1,200 confirmed Viridian casualties, with another 300 wounded. The Kryloth killed anyone they caught in the open. It was systematic slaughter. Morrison's jaw tightened. What about the prisoners? We've got about 4,000 Kryloth soldiers in custody. Most surrendered without a fight once their commander gave the order. A few tried to fight to the death. They're dead now. Good. Morrison looked at the ruins around them. Get me a channel to Earth Command. We're going to need construction crews, agricultural specialists, teachers, everyone. These people need more than medical treatment. They need to rebuild their entire civilization. Sir, with respect, that's going to take years, maybe decades. We can't commit to staying here that long. Morrison turned to look at his executive officer. Commander, we came here to make a statement. That statement was that humanity protects the innocent. If we leave now, we're just another military force that showed up, shot some bad guys, and left. We need to finish what we started. While the humans worked on the surface, other events were unfolding in orbit. The captured Kryloth fleet was being processed. Human boarding teams had secured every ship, disarmed every weapon, and taken control of all systems. It was the largest military prize in recent galactic history. But Morrison was not interested in keeping the ships. Instead, he had ordered them prepared for transfer. They would be given to the Viridian people, along with training on how to use them. If Viridian Prime was going to survive in a hostile galaxy, it needed the ability to defend itself. Elder Mayvara was called to a meeting with Captain Morrison that afternoon. She arrived to find him standing in a temporary command center that the humans had set up in one of the few intact buildings. Maps and holographic displays covered every surface, showing reconstruction plans and defense strategies. Elder Mayvara. Morrison greeted her formally. Thank you for coming. Please sit. She sat carefully, her old bones aching from days of stress and fear. Captain Morrison, I want to thank you again for what your people have done. You saved us. Without you, we would all be dead or enslaved. You're welcome, Morrison replied. But I need you to understand something, Elder. This isn't over. The Kryloth are going to come back. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but eventually, they'll return with more ships and more soldiers. And next time, we might not be here to stop them. Mayvara felt cold fear settle in her stomach. Then what do we do? You learn to defend yourselves. Morrison pulled up a holographic display showing the captured Kryloth ships. We're going to give you these vessels. We're going to train your people how to use them. We're going to teach you tactics, strategy, weapons operation, everything you need to know. But you need to decide if that's what you want. I don't understand. Why would we not want protection? Morrison leaned forward. Because protection comes with a price, Elder. We're not asking for money or resources, but we are asking you to change. Your people are philosophers and artists. That's beautiful. But the galaxy doesn't care about beauty. It cares about power. If you want to survive, you need to be willing to fight for your survival. Mayvara was quiet for a long moment. Everything in her nature rebelled against the idea of violence. The Viridian people had given up war thousands of years ago. They had built a society based on peace, learning, and artistic expression. Could they really go back to being warriors? But then she thought about the last 6 days. She thought about the children who had died, the families torn apart, the terror of waiting for death in that temple. And she realized that peace was not the absence of violence. Peace was something you had to protect, even if that protection required violence. Teach us, she said finally. Teach us how to defend ourselves. Morrison nodded with something like respect. We will. But understand that this means change. Your society, your culture, your way of life, everything will be different. You'll have to create a military, you'll have to train soldiers, you'll have to learn how to make hard decisions. Are you ready for that? No, Mayvara admitted honestly, but we'll do it anyway, because the alternative is extinction. 3 months passed on Viridian Prime. The city slowly rose from the ruins. Human engineers and Viridian workers labored side by side, rebuilding homes, schools, and hospitals. But they also built new things: military academies, training facilities, weapons factories. The peaceful world was learning how to make war. Sergeant Martinez stood on a training field, watching a group of Viridian recruits run through weapons drills. They were clumsy, uncertain, afraid of the rifles they carried. But they were learning. Every day they got a little better, a little faster, a little more confident. One of the recruits, a young male named Kelvor, approached Martinez during a break. "Sergeant, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why do you do this? You came here to fight the Kryloth and you won. But now you're spending months teaching us how to fight. Why not just leave and let us figure it out ourselves?" Martinez thought about the question carefully. "Because leaving you defenseless would make us just as bad as the Kryloth. We'd be abandoning you to die, and that's not who we are. But you've lost soldiers here. 3 of your people died clearing Kryloth holdouts from the northern sector. You're spending time and resources on us that you could use elsewhere. It doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense," Martinez replied. "Every species we help defend themselves is one less species the Kryloth can conquer. Every world we protect becomes an ally, and eventually, there will be enough of us that the Kryloth won't be able to conquer anyone. That's the goal. Not just to win battles, but to change the entire galaxy." Kelvor looked doubtful. "That sounds impossible." "Probably is," Martinez admitted with a grin. "But we're going to try anyway. That's what humans do. We try impossible things, and sometimes we actually succeed." In orbit above Viridian Prime, human instructors were teaching Viridian crews how to operate the captured warships. It was slow, difficult work. The Viridians had no military tradition, no understanding of tactics or strategy. But they were intelligent and motivated. Fear was a powerful teacher. Captain Morrison received regular reports on the training progress. The Viridians were learning faster than expected. Within a year, maybe 2, they would have a functioning defense force. Not strong enough to face the Kryloth Empire alone, but strong enough to hold out until help arrived. But help from where? That was the question that kept Morrison awake at night. Earth could not defend every world that needed protection. Humanity had resources, technology, and willpower, but they were still just one species. The galaxy was vast, and the Kryloth were powerful. How could humanity possibly protect everyone? Who needed protecting? The answer came from an unexpected source. Ships began arriving at Viridian Prime from other worlds. Not military vessels, but diplomatic ones. Ambassadors from a dozen different species, all of them asking the same questions. Could humanity protect them too? Would the humans teach them? To defend themselves, was there really an alternative to? News of what happened at Viridian Prime traveled through the galaxy, faster than any starship. Within days, every species with access to galactic communications knew the story. The mighty Kryloth Empire had been defeated by a species most had dismissed as primitive newcomers. Humanity had done what the Galactic Council refused to do: protect the innocent. The council chambers on Nova Centralis erupted into chaos when the first reports arrived. Representatives from 40 different species filled the Grand Hall, all of them shouting questions, demands, and accusations at the council leadership. Some were angry that humanity had acted without permission. Others were angry that the council had done nothing while the Viridians died. The council speaker, an ancient being whose species had founded the council 10,000 years ago, called for order. Her multiple tentacles writhed with agitation as she tried to restore calm to the chamber. The emergency session will come to order. We are here to discuss the unauthorized military action by the human species at Viridian Prime. Ambassador Henry Parker stood at the speaker's podium, looking calm despite the storm of controversy swirling around him. He was older than most diplomats, with gray hair and lines on his face that spoke of a long life. He wore simple clothes and glasses that made him look more like a teacher than a diplomat. That was intentional. Humanity had learned that being underestimated was often an advantage. Ambassador Parker, the council speaker said formally, "You are here to answer for your species. Actions at Viridian Prime. The council requires an explanation for this. Violation of established protocols." Parker adjusted his glasses and looked around the chamber. "Thank you, Counselor. I'm happy to answer any questions, though I must admit some confusion about why we need to explain saving innocent lives from genocide." "The protocols are clear," shouted Counselor Drevak, whose species had long dominated the council's military policies. His voice boomed across the chamber. "All military actions in council space require prior approval. You violated our sovereignty." Parker pulled out a datapad and held it up for the chamber to see. "I have here 17 separate distress calls from Viridian Prime. 17 desperate pleas for help sent over 6 days. Would the council like to hear them?" The chamber fell silent. Several counselors looked uncomfortable. "I also have the council's response," Parker continued. His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "You told them you would not intervene. You said Viridian Prime was outside protected space. You told them to negotiate with an empire that does not negotiate. You abandoned them to die. The council must consider many factors," another counselor protested. "Military intervention is not simple. We must weigh costs and benefits, political implications, strategic concerns." "While you were weighing your concerns," Parker said quietly, "children were dying. Families were being torn apart. An entire civilization was facing extinction. And you did nothing." The chamber erupted again. Some ambassadors were shouting in support of humanity. Others were condemning the breach of protocol. The noise grew until the council speaker had to activate sound dampeners to restore order. "The fact remains," the speaker said firmly, "that humanity acted without authority. This cannot be permitted. What's to stop any species from taking military action whenever they please?" Parker smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "Nothing, Counselor. That's exactly the point. Humanity is not asking for your permission. We're not requesting approval. We're informing you of how things are going to work from now on. We have established the Terran Protection Accords. If a species is strong enough to defend itself, we leave them alone. If a species threatens innocent people, we stop them. And if a species is being victimized and no one else will help, then we will. You cannot simply declare yourselves the galaxy's protectors," Drevak roared. "We're not declaring ourselves the galaxy's protectors," Parker replied calmly. "We're declaring ourselves the alternative to your protection. Because frankly, Counselor, your protection isn't worth much. You failed Viridian Prime. How many other worlds have you failed? How many species have gone extinct because you were too concerned with protocols and procedures to actually help them?" The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Several counselors looked away, unable to meet Parker's gaze. Because everyone in that chamber knew he was right. The council had failed repeatedly to protect weaker species. They prioritized stability over justice, political convenience over moral duty. "The human species is playing a dangerous game," the council speaker said quietly. "You are making enemies. Powerful enemies. The Kryloth Empire will not forgive this defeat." "We're counting on it," Parker replied. "Because the next time the Kryloth attack someone, we'll be ready. And every time they lose, they'll think twice about the next attack. Eventually, they'll learn that conquest has become too expensive. That's how you stop an empire, Counselor. Not with protocols and procedures, but with consequences they can't afford to pay." Back on Earth, The public reaction to Viridian Prime was overwhelmingly positive. Humans had grown up on stories of heroes and protectors, of standing against bullies and defending the weak. The idea that humanity would be that force for the galaxy resonated deeply with billions of people. But in the Pentagon, where Earth's military leadership met to plan strategy, the discussions were more serious. Admiral Kate Nelson stood before a holographic display showing the galactic map. Red zones marked Kryloth-controlled space, blue zones showed human colonies, and scattered throughout were dozens of green markers, each representing a species that had secretly contacted Earth asking for protection. "We're spread too thin," Admiral Nelson said to the assembled officers. "We have the technology advantage, but we don't have the numbers. If the Kryloth come at us with everything they have, we could be in serious trouble." Colonel Ryan Peters studied the map. "We need to be strategic. We can't defend everyone simultaneously. We need to choose key positions, worlds that can be turned into strong points. Let the Kryloth smash themselves against fortified defenses instead of chasing them across the galaxy. That means some species won't get protection," observed Commander Linda Shaw. The intelligence officer, "How do we choose who lives and who dies?" The question hung heavy in the room. These were military officers trained to make hard decisions. But this was different. This was deciding the fate of entire civilizations. "We don't choose who dies," Admiral Nelson said finally. "We choose who we can save. And we make saving them so effective that the Kryloth stop attacking altogether. We need to shift from reactive defense to proactive deterrence." "Which means we need to hit them where it hurts," Peter said. "Their supply lines, their manufacturing centers, their command and control. Make them understand that every attack on a protected world will result in devastating losses." "That's war," Shaw said quietly. "Real war, not just border skirmishes. We're talking about striking deep into Kryloth space. They'll have no choice but to respond with everything they have." Admiral Nelson nodded slowly. "I know, but we passed the point of no return at Viridian Prime. The galaxy knows what we're capable of now. If we back down, we look weak, and weakness invites attack." 3 months after the Battle of Viridian Prime, the Kryloth Empire struck back. They hit a human colony on the edge of settled space, a world called New Haven. The attack was brutal and calculated. The Kryloth did not target military installations. They targeted civilians. The attack killed 15,000 people in the first hour. Schools were bombed. Hospitals were destroyed. Residential areas were systematically leveled. It was a massacre designed to send a message to humanity. If you protect others, we will make you pay in blood. Captain Jake Morrison, now promoted to Commodore and given command of an entire battle group, received the news while still at Viridian Prime. He read the casualty reports in silence, his face carved from stone. 15,000 dead, most of them civilians. Men, women, children killed simply because they were human. "Sir," Commander Wright said carefully, "Earth Command is ordering us to return home. They want the fleet to defend human space." Morrison looked at his executive officer for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No, we're not running back to hide behind our borders. We're going after them. Sir, the Kryloth fleet that hit New Haven is already deep in their own territory. If we follow them, we'll be outnumbered 20-1, maybe more. It would be suicide. Then we'd better make sure we hit them so hard that numbers don't matter." Morrison turned to the tactical display and began plotting a pursuit course. "The Kryloth think they can terrorize us into backing down. They think if they kill enough of us, we'll retreat. They're wrong. We're going to chase them back to their home system if necessary, and we're going to make them regret ever attacking a human world. Commodore, I have to advise against this. Earth Command will not approve." Morrison looked up with eyes that had gone cold and hard. "I'm not asking for approval, Commander. I'm giving an order. We leave for Kryloth space in 6 hours. Spread the word to the fleet. Tell them what happened at New Haven. Tell them we're going to make the Kryloth pay for every single life they took." Across human-controlled space, 8 more battle groups began forming up. The news of New Haven had spread quickly, and the response was. The war that followed would be remembered by historians as the turning point, the moment when the balance of power in the galaxy shifted forever. Not because of the size of the battles, though they were massive, not because of the death toll, though it was terrible, but because it was the moment when the smaller species of the galaxy realized they did not have to live in fear anymore. For 8 months, the conflict raged across 30 star systems. The Kryloth Empire, which had dominated its region of space for 2 centuries, found itself fighting an enemy that refused to follow any established rules of warfare. Human battlegroups appeared where they should not be able to reach, struck with devastating speed, and vanished before reinforcements could respond. The humans fought differently than any species the Kryloth had encountered. They took risks that seemed insane. They pursued victories that appeared impossible. They sacrificed individual ships to destroy entire fleets, and most terrifying of all, they never ever gave up. No matter how many times they were pushed back, they came again, harder, faster, angrier. But the real story was not being written in space battles. It was being written on worlds like Viridian Prime, where something remarkable was happening. The peaceful species were learning to fight. Sergeant Kyle Martinez stood on a training field, watching Viridian recruits practice weapons drills. 6 months ago, these same people had been artists, teachers, farmers. Now they moved with the confidence of soldiers. Not great soldiers yet, but competent ones, capable of defending their homes. Again, Martinez called out, "You're still hesitating. In combat, hesitation gets you killed. React, don't think." Kelvor, who had been one of Martinez's first students, now helped train the newer recruits. He had transformed from a frightened civilian into something resembling a warrior. His aim was good. His tactics were sound. More importantly, his fear had been replaced with determination. "Sergeant," Kelvor said during a break, "we received word that the Kryloth are gathering forces for another attack on Viridian Prime. They want to retake this world." Martinez nodded. He had expected this. Viridian Prime had become a symbol of Kryloth defeat. Taking it back would restore their reputation. "How long do we have?" 2 weeks, maybe less. 3 full fleets are being assembled. Then we have 2 weeks to make sure you're ready. Martinez looked at the Viridian soldiers gathered around him. "This time it won't be just humans fighting for your world. It'll be you too. So I need to know right now, are you ready to defend your home?" The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then Kelvor stepped forward, raising his rifle. "We are ready, Sergeant. We will fight." The others followed one by one until every Viridian soldier was standing at attention. Fear was visible in their eyes, but so was determination. They had lost their world once. They would not lose it again. In orbit above Viridian Prime, Commodore Jake Morrison studied the tactical reports. The Kryloth were committing 3 entire fleets to this attack, nearly 500 warships. It was the largest force they had assembled since the war began. "They were making this personal, sir," Commander Paul Wright said quietly. "Even with all our reinforcements, we'll be outnumbered 3 to 1. Those are bad odds." "They're not coming just for us," Morrison replied. He pulled up a larger tactical display. Dozens of ship signatures were appearing at the edges of the system. Ships from 20 different species all coming to defend Viridian Prime. They were smaller vessels, nowhere near the capability of human warships, but there were hundreds of them. "The galaxy is watching this battle," Morrison explained. "If we win, it proves that together, the younger species can stand against the old empires. If we lose, everyone goes back to hiding behind the Council's worthless protection. So no pressure then," Wright said with dark humor. Morrison allowed himself a small smile. "We've faced worse odds before, and we're still here." The Battle of Viridian Prime would be studied in military academies for generations. Not because of its size, though nearly 1,000 ships participated. Not because of its tactics, though they were innovative, but because it was the battle where everything changed. The Kryloth arrived in 3 massive waves, each designed to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers. Their plan was simple: crush the human defenders, scatter the Allied forces, and reclaim Viridian Prime as an example of what happened to those who resisted the Kryloth Empire. The first wave hit the defensive line like a hammer. 5 minutes into the battle, the human fleet was already taking casualties. Ships burned in orbit, crews died at their stations, but they held their ground, giving as good as they got. For every human ship destroyed, 3 Kryloth vessels were eliminated, and the Allied forces, those smaller ships from 20 different species, fought with unexpected courage. They lacked the weapons and armor of the larger vessels, but they had numbers and determination. More importantly, they had learned from humanity that fighting back was possible. A small corvette from the Talarian Collective, barely larger than a human shuttle, rammed itself into a Kryloth cruiser when its weapons failed. The explosion took out both ships but saved a crippled human destroyer from destruction. A squadron of fighters from the Vex Alliance, Flying ships held together with improvised repairs, threw themselves at a Kryloth dreadnought's engines. They died to the last pilot, but the dreadnought was left drifting and helpless. This was what the Kryloth had not anticipated. They had fought wars of conquest for centuries, but they had never faced enemies willing to sacrifice everything for their freedom. They understood military might, but they did not understand the power of desperation combined with hope. The second wave tried to adapt. The Kryloth commanders attempted to use their numbers to envelop the human formations. But Morrison had anticipated this move. At his signal, the human fleet suddenly broke formation. Each ship led a group of allied vessels in a counterattack that shattered the Kryloth lines. It was chaos. Beautiful, terrible chaos. Ships from dozens of species fought side by side against a common enemy. Communication was difficult because everyone spoke different languages, but the intent was clear. Hold the line. Protect Viridian Prime. Do not let the Kryloth win. On the ground, Kryloth landing forces broke through the orbital defenses and made for the surface. Thousands of Kryloth soldiers in drop pods heading for the cities where Viridian civilians sheltered. But this time, the Viridians were ready. Sergeant Martinez led his unit to support the Viridian defense forces, but to his surprise, they barely needed help. The Viridians had set up defensive positions exactly as they had been trained. They waited until the Kryloth were in range, then opened fire with disciplined volleys. Their aim was good. Their tactics were sound. A Kryloth assault team tried to break through the eastern defensive line. They met Kelvor and his squad, who held their ground and fought with the ferocity of people defending their homes. The Kryloth were larger, stronger, more experienced, but the Viridians had something the Kryloth lacked. They were fighting for something that mattered. Hold this position, Kelvor shouted to his soldiers. They will not pass. And they did not pass. The Viridian defense forces, trained by human soldiers and armed with human weapons, stopped the Kryloth ground assault cold. For every meter the Kryloth advanced, they paid in blood. Eventually, they stopped advancing altogether. In space, the third Kryloth wave never made it to the main battle. It was intercepted by a human fleet that jumped in behind them, led by Admiral Kate Nelson herself. The Kryloth found themselves trapped between two forces with no room to maneuver. Admiral Nelson watched the battle from the bridge of her flagship and felt a grim satisfaction. All ships weapons free. Let's finish this. The human fleet tore into the trapped Kryloth ships with mechanical precision, railguns firing at near-light speed, missiles hunting targets with artificial intelligence, energy weapons cutting through armor like it was nothing. The third wave was destroyed in less than an hour. The remaining Kryloth forces, seeing their reinforcements destroyed and their ground assault failing, began to retreat. Ships broke formation and fled toward the system's edge, desperate to reach jump distance and escape. The human and allied forces pursued, harrying them every step of the way. By the time the last Kryloth ship jumped away from Viridian Prime, the Kryloth Empire had lost over 300 warships. The allied forces had lost less than 100. It was not just a victory. It was a statement. The galaxy could fight back. And when Ambassador Henry Parker stood before the Galactic Council once more. But this time the chamber was different. Half the ambassadors stood as he entered, a sign of respect. The other half sat in stunned silence, still processing what had happened at Viridian Prime. Ambassador Parker, the council speaker said carefully. Her voice lacked its usual authority. The council acknowledges that humanity has acted with unexpected effectiveness. Perhaps there is room for discussion about reforming our collective security arrangements. Parker adjusted his glasses and looked around the chamber. With respect, Counselor, we're not interested in reforming your arrangements. We're interested in protecting people, and we will continue to do so, with or without your approval. You cannot sustain this indefinitely, Counselor Dravak protested, though his voice lacked conviction. Your resources are limited. Your people will